Okay. Welcome everyone to the Toku Portal podcast. It's me Zero here, soloing it this time. Welcome to the Roundtable, episode 26. This episode, I'm talking about Ultraman the Next, a 2004 tokusatsu movie. Um, so yeah, I guess before we start, I'll just do a little bit of an update of what the hell's going on with the channel and why nobody else is here. So yeah, basically what happened is like last week we tried to stream, but like everybody's schedule was really busy, so nobody had time to do it. And then we thought, well, what the hell? We'll just take 1 week off. Superhero Time will be back next week. It'll be fine. And it's next week, and Superhero Time's not back. So yeah, that kind of messed up our plan. We weren't thinking of taking 2 weeks off, but that's just how things turned out. And then yeah, because of that last minute, like, oh shit, Superhero Time's not back. We tried to get some stuff together, but like this week's weird. So schedules are messed up. So it's just me right now, which is fine. I mean, like, this is gonna be a short episode anyway. But yeah, like, hopefully next week Superhero Time's back, in which case we will be back to our regular programming with Rider and Sentai. But yeah, as of right now, Superhero Time's still on hiatus, and the crew is busy doing their own stuff, so it's just me. Hopefully this isn't terrible. Hopefully the audio is also okay. Yeah, sorry I didn't announce the stream, so nobody's here. I mean, people are rarely here, but sometimes they show up. Whatever. So on to this movie. All right. Yeah. So let me just do a small breakdown of what the hell this is. Yeah, basically Ultraman the Next was like a project. It was it came out in 2004. It's a project. It was part of the Ultraman series project. Ultra N project, which was basically how should I put it? Like in the early 2000s, Ultraman was having a really bad time, like finding his footing again. I mean, it's like a really long running franchise, but like a lot of franchises kind of had that problem of like in the early 2000s they had to like rediscover or reignite their franchises, and Ultraman was one of them, like like Doctor Who and Kamen Rider and whatnot, but like Ultraman was still struggling, so they tried to do this trend that was there in the early 2000s where like franchises were coming back, but they were kind of doing slightly more mature films, try to get older audiences back in. They were usually theatrical movies instead of being TV shows, at least originally. And then they were just trying to reignite people and get them back in. They were usually like kind of remakes or reboots type of thing, so it's like a fresh new entry into the franchise. You didn't really have to know anything else to get in. Like Kamen Rider also tried this with Kamen Rider the first, funnily enough, and then Kamen Rider the Next also, which unfortunately did not succeed. They were interesting movies, but again, they were sort of similar to Ultraman the Next, where it's like they were kind of reboots trying to get people back in to the franchise. I mean, Toei tried a couple more, like they tried Kikaider and Metal Heroes. Like the Metal Heroes is an interesting one because it's like it's a very different take of reboot, because they just made them legacy heroes, where it's like, okay, no, this is just the next guy who's gonna take up this legendary title, like Gavan. There's just a new Gavan. I mean, it's already high tech gear, so from like a space police force, they're not gonna get newer gear, right? Like it's already state of the art when the first guys had it, because it was so much more advanced than Earth tech. Right. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked, but yeah, Metal Heroes was interesting. But Ultraman tried this project, Ultraman N Project or Ultra N Project, and Ultraman the Next was part of it. Unfortunately, it did not succeed. It still took a couple years for Ultraman to find its footing again. I mean, but it did kind of get the ball rolling. How should I put it? It's sort of just like got, I guess, like the idea of Ultraman back, which is kind of weird because like I was gonna say it's sort of like Blade for like Marvel, where it's like it was this own standalone thing. It kind of got the ball rolling. Most people don't remember it, but it's not really true because like Ultraman never really went away. A lot of Japan still had Ultraman, but it used to be a lot more of reruns and compilation shows and stuff. So Ultraman was still on TV, unlike Kamen Rider, which was pretty much just gone. Like Kamen Rider was in like manga form and like other little things, sort of like Doctor Who, where you had like other media like audio dramas and stuff going on. Kamen Rider was kind of like that, whereas Ultraman was still kind of always on TV. It was just a lot more reruns and stuff. The thing was like, I guess everybody thought it was kind of like an old franchise that was kind of dead and gone. Subaru was still, yeah, Subaru Productions and Toho were still trying to, reignite the fires of Ultraman, which unfortunately took a lot longer. I mean, it maybe the Bandai thing helped, maybe it didn't. I mean, it made it from an outsider's point looking in, it kind of made it a little more Kamen Rider-esque when it finally started getting season after season of shows. But that's like years later from this point. And also, I'm thinking what mostly helped was like finally getting their damn rights back internationally and stuff, so they could start releasing more worldwide, which definitely helped because like Ultraman has like a bigger, pretty decent fan base. I mean, it's like not huge, but it's still like well enough known. It's sort of the Garo strategy of like, yeah, Japan's good and all, but like you're never gonna beat the good guys. I mean, good guys. I mean the big guys of like like Toei, like Rider and Sentai, unless you diversify and go after other markets to secure a more decent like revenue source. Because like Toei works with Bandai and like the toys kind of help stabilize it, but like Garo and Ultraman, the toys are there, but like I guess it's not on the same level. I mean, like modern Ultraman, maybe it's a little closer to that, but in the olden days, I guess, or a couple years ago, not so much, especially not for Ultraman the Next. Anyway, I'm like getting way the hell off topic. So the point is, this was a reboot trying to get Ultraman franchise started. The reboot strategy didn't quite succeed, but then like very few franchises have ever actually managed to make that work. Even Kamen Rider tried it and didn't succeed. To be fair, like the Kamen Rider movies are nowhere near as good as this. I mean, this isn't amazing, but this is a much more solid movie than those. Those are fun spectacle. This is actually a decent theatrical movie. Like if you know nothing about Ultraman, you could still watch this and be like, all right, that was a decent movie. So that's basically why I'm mostly making this, because I guess this is on Crunchyroll or something. Not 100% sure, but I mean, it's definitely on YouTube. Maybe not officially subbed, but yeah, you can find it. So if you're wondering like, hey, I want to watch some tokusatsu, and I don't know, man, I have never seen any Ultraman. Is this a movie I can get into? Yeah, you can get into it. It's basically like Ultraman is there, but it's basically like you don't have to know anything about the franchise to watch this, right? Like it does a really decent introduction because basically I'm guessing this is not in the mainline Ultraman continuity because Ultraman has a couple different continuities. Um, I mean, like I'm not the biggest Ultraman fan, so I don't know all the details, but I do know there's like a couple different like continuities. There's like the main one, which a lot of Ultraman take place in, and then there's one with Tiga, and then there's this one. Um, yeah. So like I think Ultraman the Next and maybe Nexus or something takes place in this continuity, and then most of the other ones take place in the mainline one, and then a couple take place in the Tiga timeline. Um, but this movie, what the hell is it? Well, basically, it's how should I explain it? Like it's it's less of like a regular Ultraman movie, which Ultraman movies tend to be more like tokusatsu movies where it's like gather all the band together and beat the bad guy. Whereas this is more of like, okay, alien crashed on Earth, and there's a second alien that followed, and shit happens. So basically, it's like, okay, what the hell? So basically, what happens is there's two energy balls basically that just come to the Earth. There's a blue one that comes to the Earth first, and then there's a red one. The red one is Ultraman, and the blue one is basically the One, because the code names given is the One or the Beast or whatever, and that's the first one, and that's the enemy. And then the next is the code name given for the Ultraman in this movie, because he's the one who shows up next, basically the second one to show up. And so the first blue energy orb falls from space, goes into the deep Pacific Ocean. It the Japanese Navy, I guess, investigated. One of the deep sea divers, or I guess like submariners, because it's more like a submarine, while investigating the blue orb, basically gets their submarine damaged. Then they disappear for a while, and then they reappear, but they look like a monster. So they're trying to like study what the hell's going on with this guy. And then basically what's happened is that energy orb, this alien life form, has taken over that soldier, and it senses that the Ultraman is coming, so it decides to break free and then like do what monsters do, try to like wreck shit, take over the Earth, whatever, normal monster plot. Whereas the Ultraman comes to the Earth, it's this blue orb, and it possesses the main character of the movie, who is an F-15 Eagle fighter pilot working for the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force. Basically, he's a dad who has a sick son, and he basically thinks that like the doctors have said that like there's a chance his son might not live very long, and he thinks like his job is pretty dangerous, and like he's already achieved his dream of being a fighter pilot, so maybe he wants to spend more time with his family, so he decides to retire. But what happens is right before he's about to retire, well, he's put in like I guess like his retirement paperwork, but what happens is like they pick up a signal of this like red energy beam coming in, and he's sent out to intercept it. He intercepts it, but his plane gets damaged. Just like the submarine, it's like totally destroyed, but he survives. So like his plane like takes the hit and like crashes in the mountains, but like he survives it, goes to the hospital, and they figure out he's got like no damage at all. At which point the military start following him, or like keeping tabs on him, because what had happened is the original I'm just gonna call what they call the monster, the one. Um, what had happened is the one basically broke out. Like, okay, the one came back to basically their research facility to try to get help, but then he couldn't get help, and then it decided to break out. So the military is like looking for him, and then they see similar signs to what happened to the one with Maki, so they start following Maki. Because the one turned out to be a monster, so they think Maki might be another monster. And then basically, but Maki shows no signs. But just to be sure, the military decided to pull him in and use him as bait, which Maki is not okay with, which is great. But as predicted, the one shows up. Maki, because he's basically the host to Ultraman, kind of freaks out. Because he can sense, like, it's kind of like an Agito situation where it's like, it gives you more extrasensory powers. So if you've seen Agito, it's sort of like that, where he can sense the one coming, so he's just freaking out. And then he gets used as bait. The person who set up the bait is basically, there's like a special division of the military who works after like basically anti-bioweapons, and it's the Japanese branch, but they coordinate with the U.S. forces because the U.S. has like a decent military presence in Japan. But the chief scientist, who is Sarah, or Sarah, I guess, basically tries to set a trap because the one previously had said that he sensed Ultraman, and Ultraman basically shows up on their doorstep. They use him as bait. The one shows up. They try to take him down using poison, but then you figure out what the one's deal is, and it's rapid adaptability. And so like you can try to kill it, but if it adapts, then basically your methods are useless. So I'm not like, this is kind of beginning of the movie. There's a lot more shit that happens. I'm not going to give you all the play-by-play, but basically this is kind of just the setup for the movie. Maybe this is like the first third, and then go figure out what happens, because like everything else is just revelations and fights, and it's all really well done. But I'm not going to go play-by-play because we'll be here forever. But basically what happens is the military sets a trap and the one shows up. Unfortunately, what happens is you figure out the one can adapt to their attacks, so it doesn't work. But Maki starts awakening as Ultraman. And then there you have the setup. Is the ones trying to fucking kill Ultraman or just rampage, and Maki has to learn to control Ultraman and convince the military that he's trustworthy. And then Sarah also kind of has a lot going on, because she was the chief scientist who let the one escape, because the one wasn't fully a monster yet, still had a little bit of humanity left, and she let him go, so she now feels guilty that all these deaths are on her hand, and that drives her actions. And I'm just gonna leave it at there, because like it's actually pretty interesting what happens, because basically there's a lot of drama, and like there's action for an Ultraman or like a tokusatsu movie, but it's not like the primary focus of the movie, right? I mean, that's not true. It's pretty heavily focused, but it's not as much focused as like your standard tokusatsu movie where it's like half the freaking movie is just action. No, this is like we have action, maybe a third of the movie is action, right? The rest of the movie is Maki and his family stuff, which is all actually really well done, really human and heartwarming. Like Maki and his best friend and all that, which is really great. And then you see Sarah's backstory and how she's connected with all this. And then the other stuff is also some of the more, I guess, like civilian or military stuff going on. So I'm gonna just like talk about some of that stuff, which is stuff I found interesting. Where, like, one of the more interesting, like, there's maybe like one or two scenes where the military is annoying, where I'm like, why are you doing that? Like, you're just being antagonistic because of the plot. There's like, I can think of one scene. But like, for most of the movie, yeah, they do a little bit of shady stuff. But it's like, alright, they actually act like reasonable people. It's like, oh, we made an attack. Okay, that didn't work. Retreat. You know, no point in fucking dying, making a dumbass second attack, right? Oh, that monster is attacking? Guess what? Evacuate the civilians first. You know, like, they actually do a lot of sensible stuff in this movie. Or when they try to get, like, Maki and stuff, where they're, like, secretly trying to guide him to where their secret base is and stuff. It kind of turns into a spy movie for a sec. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Right? So like it's very interesting because it's like it's more just like how should I put it? Like imagine Shin Godzilla compared to a normal Godzilla movie, where it's like it's a lot more like real life stuff happening, but there's still monster stuff happening. So it's kind of like that. It's very interesting. So like I said, like if you find this interesting, like you know, it's available. Like Crunchyroll probably has it. Um, YouTube definitely has it. If you want to watch, like watch it just to see a different flavor because this is not normal Ultraman. It's got Ultraman elements. Oh, there's a lot of Ultraman throwbacks. Like the attack and stuff, and definitely a little bit of the design. I mean, the design is different than most Ultraman. Like, it looks a little more armored because they were trying to go from more of a slightly grittier reboot type thing. And as the designer said, like, I couldn't really take anything away from Ultraman because Ultraman's such a simple design. If you take anything away, it doesn't look like Ultraman anymore. So you have to kind of do other stuff. Like, you have to add stuff onto Ultraman, right, to change out the design. That would probably explain why, like, the newer Ultraman have all this stuff just bolted on to them. And they look a little too busy, honestly. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of this Ultraman design, but, like, you know, it works for the movie it's in. Speaking of which, we can get into, like, the action and, like, the suits and stuff. Like, honestly, the suit work is pretty great. Like, the stuff with the one is so good. Like, especially like that later, like in his final form, or like you know, like close to his final form stuff. Like when he's like absorbing stuff, especially with the crows and stuff, it looks so good. It's really cool, especially when you see like like okay, the CGI is not great. Right, like 2004, like Japan, so give it a break, people. Like, the CGI is definitely not great. But, you know, it's passable for what it is. I mean, we're tokusatsu fans, we're used to shit CGI. But, like, the practical, like, the sets are great. You know, like, the model work's great. The monster suit's freaking great. Like the way it adapts and you see it like the real monster suit adapting. So that's why I said like the like its final form and stuff is freaking cool. But one thing so there's like a good thing and a bad thing where it's like, all right, So the stages and stuff look great, and the sense of scale, like the height, is great. So like when Maki meets Ultraman on the inside, it's this amazing scene where it's like Maki just kind of flies in, and every time he gets to talk to Ultraman because he's the host on the inside, it's those scenes are great. Um, Honestly, I think that kind of just set a precedent because like later on going forward, that type like Ultraman tends to use that type of look um, for Ultraman stuff more and more, or at least it did for a while in the 2000s, which is great. But the sense of scale, you like immediately get it. It's like, oh, that's a human compared to Ultraman, like so much bigger. And it's like it's actually really elegant the way they do like the host stuff. Really great. Um, the the Ultraman suit, like it looks fine. Like I'm not the biggest fan of how armored it is, but like I guess it works for this movie. Um, as for it, like the actions are actually pretty solid. Like it's not amazing like compared to like Rider or Sentai. Well, I mean definitely Rider. It's a little slower pace because well like they're giant monsters. They're supposed to be slow, but that does bring into one problem, which is it doesn't do the Kamen Rider J thing, which is the old school monster movie thing of they overcrank the camera, which means you're getting more frames, which means it looks like they're moving slower, but everything really just falls naturally, so it looks like they're giant monsters. Like sometimes they move a little too fast for how big they're supposed to be, basically. But like it's not terribly distracting. It's fine. But that's kind of like the only nitpick because some of the other cool stuff they do is like whenever like they're interacting with the miniatures or the sets, like Ultraman gets hit by a building and then like shot through the building and like it explodes. And there's like stuff like it goes from CGI to like live action where like Ultraman's getting up. So like the integration of like CGI and just like normal like flame explosions and stuff and miniatures, it's like it's really interesting because you don't see that kind of stuff in Rider. It's actually pretty amazing integration because it looks like holy shit did they just like explode a building on top of a stunt guy. It's like well maybe I don't even know, or I mean like it's a miniature but like it looks insane. So that's great. Also they're not all giant monster fights. Like there are giant monster fights, but like the scale goes up as the battle goes up because Ultraman the next or whatever has like two forms and like the monster has multiple forms, so they go from like giant to like huge, right? Like they go from like being like okay a couple stories tall, like 2 to 3 stories tall, to being like skyscraper. Well, maybe not skyscraper tall, but like I mean like at least like I don't know like 10-ish maybe stories tall by the end, and it actually works pretty well. So yeah, like definitely the suit work is pretty damn top notch. Um, the military guys, like that's the thing, like they tried to incorporate a lot more like realistic military hardware in this, and it actually looks pretty good. I mean, except for some of the CGI at the end, which to be fair, it's Ultraman. They kind of have a tradition of using like the defense forces. So like some things like definitely the planes kind of do a little more like crazier, like more anime-ish stuff. But it's only near the end. It's only a little bit, which I'm like, it's fine. It's not terrible. Um, it honestly it works well enough for the movie. Um, yeah, like speaking of that, I mean, like, honestly, I'm kind of amazed it's weird to say, like how well acted it is, right? Because like it doesn't feel like, oh, this is a tokusatsu movie. No, it's like, no, this is a movie where tokusatsu stuff happens. So like everybody's taking their role seriously, and it's an Ultraman movie, therefore it's always gonna have a kid in it, which can sometimes be annoying. But like Maki's son is great. He's acted super well. He's like an adorable little kid. He's perfectly fine. His wife's acted really well. His best friends really well. The like his like civilian job crew, they're like not that much in the movie, but for what they are, they do a decent enough job. I do like, that's one of the things in this movie is like if you want to study how to make movies, like you don't have to make a giant monster movie, but if you want to study or write or just, hey, I want to make, I don't know, like an action-esque movie, right? Like, I mean, this isn't exactly a drama, but like you could say it's kind of more of like an action movie type of movie. If you want to know how to make that, watch this movie, because it's a pretty good example of how to do it. Like the structurally, it's really well done. Like it's actually fairly well written for that. Like it's basic, but it's not boring. So if you want to study it, study this movie. Um, Acting's really well done. Honestly, I also kind of like how they actually realized that, like, all right, these are characters. Let's give them character design. So like everybody has a unique outfit and stuff. I'm like, oh, that's clever, right? Like even like all the soldiers, like, oh, if that's an important soldier, they're gonna have something on them to distinguish them from all the other soldiers, right? So it's like costume designing on point, acting on point, script on point, action on point for the most part. CGI, a little hit or miss, but it does the job. Music, actually not that much, or at least not as overly blaring. But then again, like I guess Ultraman doesn't tend to have like insanely loud music, unlike Rider and stuff, which tend to be like pretty heavily focused. But yeah, I mean, then again, it's trying to be a little more naturalistic kind of movie or realistic, so it's a little more toned down. But you know, it's fine. But yeah, like, what should I say? If you're even remotely interested, and you've got like about an hour and a half, slightly more than an hour and a half to kill, definitely watch this. Like, there's so much more I could talk about this, like literally dissect it, because this is such a solid movie. Like, it's not great or amazing, but it's a really solid tokusatsu movie. Like, if you had to say, okay, pick a tokusatsu movie as just the bar, like, okay, you have to be this good or better, this movie, you could say that, right? Like, if you want to study how to write movies, if you want to study how to do action or mixing stuff, if you definitely want to study how to do freaking acting, or acting like a tokusatsu thing, study this. Because they give, like, there's a little bit of over-the-top drama, but it's like, yeah, it's tokusatsu. That's what you're supposed to do. It's supposed to be a little more melodrama. Right? So study that if you want to do that. But for the most part, like, everybody's acting seriously and in character and exactly how they should. All the characters talk a little bit differently and they do actions differently. Again, like being characters, not just like, oh, right, this is a person I needed for this part in the script. They don't all sound the same. They don't all act the same, right? Also, like, maybe this is because I'm so used to like more Western or like just generic action movie stuff where it's like you've got like the military and stuff. I mean, besides that one scene like later on in the movie, it's like nobody's like actively antagonistic or an asshole or macho, right? Any of that crap. is not in this movie. They're like, hey, I got a job to do, I'm doing it. This situation's serious, yeah, I know it sucks, but they talk to each other like adults, they deal with it. So, yeah, like, unlike when most people go like, oh, this is a mature movie, and they just do the dumbass thing of just like grotesque like violence and stuff. No, this movie is not super violent, but it is a mature movie because like Ultraman exists, but there's other problems besides Ultraman. You know, people exist, but and their actions exist. They don't magically. Everything doesn't magically get solved because the fight ends. You know, like not everything's forgiven. You know, but even or like even if somebody holds a grudge, they know the priority of the situation is like, okay, I can put this aside. So like nuanced characters are a thing. Um, like I could talk about more of this, but I would have to do like fully sit down and dissect the movie. Like I could maybe do that if anybody's interested because like you could read this movie a lot of different ways, like just from action point of view, just from like a script writing point of view, how to act in a scene, like just character design wise, because like the costuming actually did a really good job. Like if you like yeah, it's a little bit on the nose, but I'm like it's a fucking superhero movie. They're kind of supposed to be like that, right? Like a lot more dramatic stuff is happening. People like they're going through dramatic character arcs. You kind of have to like visually show it. If you want to know what the hell I'm talking about, pay attention to like Sarah and like her outfits. You'll see what the hell I'm talking about. Like they change depending on her mood, or like depending on which part of the story she is in, or where her character arc is. Um, right. Um, but again, now I'm just freaking rambling. This is a solid movie. Go watch it. Like if you're at all interested, or hell, not even Ultraman, just like if you just want to watch a tokusatsu movie that's not just like Rider or Sentai or not just franchise focused tokusatsu movie where it's like okay, it's just a standalone thing. I just want to watch a story beginning to end, see how it goes. Boom, there you go. One monster comes to Earth, one Ultraman follows. This is a self-contained story. Go for it. Um, yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say because otherwise I'd be rambling. There is definitely like again, like I said, if you want to study how to make tokusatsu, this is a movie you could study. It's simple but well told enough that you could definitely take away from this. Especially storytelling wise, like script writing wise, it's pretty solid. I mean, it's not the most like escalation, like uh, action complication escalation thing. Um, if you want to watch that, then go watch Zarum. Like that's a Memiya movie that he made in the '90s. That's pretty much the pinnacle of that. It's pretty simple, but it's like thing happens. Oh, I countered the thing. Oh shit, something happened to my counter. Now I have to come up with another plan. Like constant kind of like escalation back and forth type thing. That's a really good movie for that if you want to study that style. But if you want to study more of a general like 3 act structure hero fight type stuff, like generic good guy origin story, this is a really solid one. Yeah, so maybe I'll do a breakdown, um, or maybe like a mini series or something, breaking this movie down. If anybody's interested, otherwise I'm gonna stop it for now because I'm just rambling. But yeah, good movie. Hopefully, superhero time's back next week. Then we can get back to a regular schedule. Hopefully, this wasn't super boring. um, yeah, sorry about that. yeah, we'll see what happens next week. Anyway, thanks for joining me, everyone, and I'll catch you next time.